Hello everyone. In our today's session, we will learn and explore regarding workflow troubleshooting and debugging techniques. Now here we will be covering the topics related to the troubleshooting and debugging, under which we will see how do we resolve the issues which occurs under the workflow during debugging, and will troubleshoot some of the rules regarding the workflows. So let us see the course content for this session. The first would be the introduction regarding the troubleshooting and debugging. Then we'll see what are primary components, then what is baseline configuration. Then next we'll see about event debugging. Now under that we'll see how do we resolve the problems regarding event linkage, event parameters and the resolution to those problems. Further we'll see about agent resolution debugging. Under that we'll see what could be the problem regarding the agent resolution and what could be the solution for that. Further we'll see about workflow task, that is through debugging. Then under which we'll see about foreground task and background task. And further we'll see a summary for troubleshooting transactions. This means that we'll cover the transactions which are been required during troubleshooting. So this is a course content through which we will be covering all of these topics in detail regarding the debugging and troubleshooting techniques. So first, let us see an introduction to this particular session. Now this course focuses on practical techniques which are used to assist in the debugging and resolving workflow issues during the development and production support phases of SAP implementations. So here we will be covering the debugging and troubleshooting techniques which helps us to resolve the issues regarding the workflows. Either it could be in development system, production system or support phase of that SAP implementation. The SAP workflow application incorporates the use of several components. Now, it inbuilds components like graphical editing tool through workflow builder, which is SWDD, then some object oriented concepts, that is using the business object repository, then with the help of ABAP and a trigger mechanism into one of that SAP application modules. Now it also comprises of different modules like FICO, that is finance and controlling, then MM, which is materials management, SD, HR, etc. As business requirements are mapped into a workflow process definition and prototyping starts, debugging becomes an essential tool to expedite the implementation of a workflow process. Now, whenever we have requirements of mapping the data with the workflow, we make use of debugging techniques in order to make that tool very easy for us to understand under that workflow process. Now here we will concentrate on using the debugging techniques to resolve real world workflow implementation and production support issues. So here, before we begin, let's list some primarily assumptions and guidelines regarding this debugging techniques. So first would be the workflow engine should be enabled. Then we are working with release, that is SAP release 46C. So here there are significant changes and enhancements under the release 6.1 and 6.2 of that SAP workflow technology. And the user should be familiar with the basic workflow configuration and development. Like they should be aware of the workflow type is a single step task and type WS, that is for workflow, is a multi-step task. So here, before we begin with this debugging techniques, the user who will be using this particular technique should be familiar with these 3 points. That first he should check that workflow engine is enabled. Then it should check the version of that particular SAP release, and the user should be familiar with basic workflow configuration and development. Like he should be aware that a workflow type with TS is a single step task and workflow type with WS is a multi-step task. So this is the simple introduction regarding the debugging techniques which we will be covering through our previous part. Now Since workflow has many different elements, starting the debugger is not as straightforward as with a standalone ABAP program. So to illustrate the best way to step in and resolve issues by debugging, we will start by looking at a copy of that standard SAP workflow template for the overall release of the which is Material Management Purchase Requisition. So here, before we move ahead with the workflow and start the debugger, we need to take care of the issues which we resolve by the debugging techniques. So here, in order to start with this, the best way is to start up looking with the copy of that standard SAP workflow template instead of creating a new one. The debugging principles applied may be used with any workflow template. A custom workflow template is being used to illustrate the use of the debugging concept on background task. A new custom single step task has been created for notifying the creator of the purchase requisition release and replaces the dialog foreground task that requests the creator manually confirm a work item. So here, whenever we make use of the workflow templates under the debugging principle, they should be aware that we have a custom workflow template and a single step task for that custom workflow template that could be illustrated by notifying that creator of the purchase requisition release, and they will replace that with the dialog foreground task with the creator of that work item, where that is the request of that creator which they have created. So these are the debugging principles which should be applied with any of that workflow template. Now here we have seen a small introduction regarding the debugging techniques, the principles and the prerequisites which needs to be taken care of while we start with this troubleshooting and debugging techniques. Now next we'll see about some of the primary components under debugging. Each workflow consists of several components that are best described by answering some of the following questions. Like, when should the workflow start? So here we might have a question that we have seen about the troubleshooting and debugging. Now, when the workflow should actually start? So the answer to that question is in determining the event triggering mechanism that starts the workflow. So here, in order to start the workflow, we need to take care of the event trigger mechanism. Now, the next question could arise would be, what steps needs to be occurred? Like what task, that is the transactions, should be run either in foreground or background, or what extra efforts needs to be performed. And the third question would be, who will perform the task, like the agent resolution step. So these are the three primary questions which arises whenever we make use of workflow. So as we proceed, we will review problem solving and debugging techniques which are used in each of those components. So these were the primary components regarding the workflows. Now next we'll see about baseline configuration. Now what is a baseline configuration? First, let's break down the custom release workflow, that is the multi-step task and single-step task workflow, into its primary multi-step and single-step task. So first we have divided it into two primary elements. One would be the multi-step and the other would be single-step. So first we'll see about a custom workflow template, which is WS 9950034. Now this is a multi-step task for the overall purchase requisition, which is ZWF underscore requisition underscore release, and is a copy of the standard template, which is WS 2000077. And here it contains several single step tasks. So this was the first custom workflow template regarding purchase requisition. Then next we'll see about a single step task, which is TS2000159, which is a dialog foreground task for the overall release of the workflow, which is underscore requisition underscore release underscore C, and it has a method for bus 2105, which is single release. Now, next we'll see about single step task, which is TS2000163, which is also a dialog foreground task which requests the creator of the requisition confirm that the requisition release was cancelled, and it uses the method bus2105 with info release set reset. So this was the single step task for the requisition confirm. Then next we have single step task, which is TS2000161, which is also a dialog foreground task that requests the creator of the requisition confirm that the requisition release was refused. Earlier we have seen about requisition confirm that the requisition release was cancelled. Now next is for refusal. The method would be bus2105 with info release rejected. So this was a single step task for rejection, that is for refusal. Next we have single step task, which is TS9950020, which is a custom background task. Now previous the task which we have seen that were dialog background task. Now this is a custom background task that replaces the standard task, which is TS2000162, which is for requisition release. The concept to have a background task is to eliminate the additional work that would be required by confirming a foreground dialog work item, which is only want to send a notification and not the work item to the creator of the requisition. We enable a notification with that custom background task, and method is bus2105. Now this is Z bus2105 with Z notify requisition release. So this was the single step task for the custom background task. Next we'll review the requisition release workflow builder process flow. Now, so this was the baseline configurations which were divided into single step and multi-step. Now, here we should note that to display the delivered SAP workflow, we use the transaction PFTC. There we enter the workflow template or the task, like we enter 2000077 for task. Then we'll click on the display icon, and then from that point we'll go to the workflow builder. So this is how we go to the workflow builder through the transaction code PFTC. So this is called as a workflow builder process flow. So here we have seen about a small introduction regarding the workflow, troubleshooting and debugging. Then we have seen the primary components and baseline configuration, under which we have seen what is a single step task and a multi-step task, and the differentiation between the task under workflows.